Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of 1960s discussion. So we're talking, 60 years ago here, discussions about how to make or how to solve the problem, the social problem, as it was seen at the time, which is a social problem of single black motherhood. Now. Um, Given the overall sort of divorce rates, this is like late 50s, early 60s, the overall divorce rates weren't that high. I mean, nothing like they later became and still are today. Now, today, something like 75% of black households are headed by a single mother. And the majority of those households have um, at least three biological contributing men, different men. So, and often more than that. There are black women in their 20s, still in their 20s, who have six children by six different men. So now, but back in the day, this is again late 50s, 1950s, and early 1960s. The problem was a much smaller scale, relative to what it later became, but it was still quite a bit bigger than the white situation with single mothers and so on. So it was seen as a social problem that certainly at a scale was unique to the black. This is in the United States, the black population. So, and you could see that certainly elsewhere. That's not unusual in Africa and the Caribbean, for example. But just looking at the United States, it was the bureaucrats, and the people that were activists in this area. And again, we've got Jews, particularly Jewish lesbians, heavily overrepresented in the discussions and the policy making and so on. And their view at the time was, well, it's the problem isn't sort of a general problem in the black diaspora or attitudes to marriage or attitudes to families. The problem is irresponsible men. That's the problem. That is the sole problem. That is the only problem. Nothing else is a problem, just that. So irresponsible black men, and now if we make them responsible, then they will get married and stay married, which is the outcome we want. So their concept was, if we, and this was in the earlier discussions about child support and so on. And I'll go back to the Soviet system in the 1930s, that really was the original brainchild of a sort of government administered child support system. Was that the reason men would go to different relationships and multiple relationships because they weren't held accountable or responsible. If they financially held accountable, if they had a portion of their salaries or pay or wages taken from them by the government and given to the black woman, then they would say, well, what's the point of having another relationship? I might as well stay with this woman, given I'm being forced by the government to be financially responsible for this child or children or whatever it might be. So and it's a very bureaucratic way of thinking. Let's look how simple. The answer is so simple. Now, to do this, of course, they had to take away the legal rights and constitutional rights of these men, but kind of no one really worried about that. That was like, well, we're solving a bigger problem here, so why should we care about individual rights and legal processes or even due legal process, because we're solving a bigger problem. Of course, we see that attitude everywhere today, and it began in those sort of great society type concepts where we're solving a bigger problem. So the activist bureaucrats would say we're solving a bigger problem, which means the bigger issue is the one that we should care about. The legal rights of the individuals and the Constitution are saying, who gives a shit? And we see that, of course, permeating all thinking now today in the West. That the bigger issue, which is always the globalist issue, is the one that should be protected by various laws. But all the other laws and all the other constitutional amendments and bills of rights, that all gets moved aside because we can we've got all our trump cards. We got the aces, and there's a hierarchy and a totem pole of rights. So from the very beginning, it was deeply flawed. If the only way you can solve the social problem is by trampling on people's legal rights, then you ain't solving nothing. There's no problem being solved here at all. And it was also a very bureaucratic sort of way of thinking that, and bureaucrats are terrible for this, whether they be in totalitarian regimes or democratic regimes. They seem to think that just by pushing a button or pulling a lever, that a problem that's quite nuanced and complex can be solved. Some of this is due to that they don't want to have to face certain issues, because in order to face real issues, then they have to admit to racist attitudes or to be accused of racist. So they try and skirt around and avoid that. So in a contest of moral sort of legal chicanery, the black woman is more of a victim than the black man. Therefore, the black woman has the legal rights and the black man has no rights, given the two of them are in a legal contest. So again, deeply flawed from the outset. But that was their sort of take on it. Well, if these guys know they have to pay for the kids regardless, then they got the children regardless, then they're going to stop and think, well, I might as well have a relation with this woman, and they form a family. So that was the idea. So how did it work out? How successful was it? Did it achieve anything? Because if it, regardless of how flawed it may be, if it produced serious beneficial results, then maybe in some way it is worthwhile. I don't think trampling on people's legal rights of the individual to solve a group problem is the answer ever. But that's only my view. I'm not a Jewish lesbian bureaucrat, so what do I know? So anyway, the since then, since I say 1/4 of black, a little bit less actually, a little bit less than 1/4 of black households within the single mother thing, and mostly in the impoverished areas. But the areas were already impoverished, so it was casual. And this is again pre-contraception era type stuff. So today it's gone from, say, 23% of black households having sort of single mother, headed by single mother households, today to 75% single mother households. So those measures which were added to, that were made more onerous and more brutal, where there's a massive infrastructure now to go chasing after these men and so on. Yet the problem has multiplied by more than 3 times since the 1960s, or late 1950s, early 1960s. And since contraception came in, it was readily available. And even since there's almost mass abortion of black kids, since then, the problem has got infinitely worse, even though all the measures supposedly in place to stop it from happening have been utterly and totally ineffective. So why is that? Let's have a little look at that. Well, most sort of the black men who are and the women too, who are involved in sort of mass procreation, they're not in regular, well-paid employment. Their employment's quite irregular, or maybe they're on welfare altogether. So once they get, say, for 2 or 3 children, the man gets chased for child support, and he's on a low wage, then almost immediately upon getting the knock on the door, the threat, or immediately on that, and particularly if they've accumulated a back amount, saying, well, you owe money for the last 2 or 3 years, because it took them a while to find him or something, or he didn't have a job over those 2 years, so they couldn't locate him, or maybe he was on the street drug dealing or something. I mean, who knows, working in the underground economy. So finally they locate the guy and say, oh, by the way, you owe $20,000 in back child support. So even if he didn't come first in high school mathematics, he looks at that and goes, holy fuck, it's not even worth my while working. I might as well just work in the underground economy, or not work at all, or claim government benefits, or Section 8, government housing and this sort of thing. So it's the guy will never work again because it's just not worth it. So in that sense, it achieves absolutely nothing. In fact, it encourages and facilitates guarantees that black men, with these sort of debts, facing sort of debt, decide they will never work again in their lives. So how that achieves anything or creates responsibility, I'm not sure. I can't see it personally, but there you go. The other side of it is that the black women, particularly before and even still today, they can arbitrarily say who the supposed biological father was. They can say, well, it's him or it's them, and the man's maybe they'll send, because we're talking people who would be living at multiple address. The idea that they'd be homeowners living in unlike the white people, living in a house where you can easily locate them and find them and serve legal papers on them. That just isn't the situation. You're lucky if you find these people at all. But they've got 30 days to dispute that they're the biological parent, as the woman has claimed. The woman doesn't have to prove anything. She only needs to fill out a form, which the legal aid activist will fill out for her, and then she signs it, and that's it. That's now evidence considered to be of the highest bar of evidence. Her allegation, and it's nothing while allegation hasn't been tested or proven or anything like that. There's been no DNA test or so on. So she says he's the one. Now, whether he is the one doesn't matter. He's got 30 days. They've sent it to some address that maybe he did live at, or maybe he once lived at, or maybe he never lived at. They just send that they've done their thing. 30 days he's got to dispute. If he hasn't disputed, then that's it. He is the one. There's nothing more legally. Now, he can go through an appeals court process, but no legal aid will pay for that. No activist group's going to pay for that. He can't afford it himself. He's penniless. So that's it. He's now stuck with that for life. There's nothing he can do. Now, whether he is the one or not, who cares? The responsibility has been assigned to somebody. So bureaucratically, it's the cleanliness of the bureaucratic process has been upheld. He's the one. That's it. And move on. Let's now look at the next guy. So the legal rights of these men were just so casually disregarded that it's almost breathtaking. And the situation is worse. And later on, it began. As the years went by, it started drawing larger and larger numbers of white men as well. So it started off as a black man thing, but now it's kind of universal. All across the Western world, really, today. The difference today is DNA. DNA testing is much more accessible, but often the courts, the divorce courts and the family courts, will block the man from having a DNA test and try and force him to pay. And if he's got a house where they can find him and a steady long-term career job, then they can tear him to pieces financially. It's not a damn thing you can do about it. And financial resources he may have used to fight in court, he no longer has, because they're taking all this money off him. So, but coming back to the black thing, so the situation today is infinitely worse, more than 3 times worse than it was. 23% of households were single mother in 1960, and today it's 75%. So we're talking a very substantial deterioration in the situation. So it looks like everything they've done to try and solve the problem has only made it worse. And so the child support thing was never going to work. People who've got a long-term, well-paid career job, okay, you probably can make it work there. But people that are on low-paid, intermittently casual working, itinerant living and so on, it's never going to work for them. And the more you pile the debt up on them, the less likely it is they will ever work again, which is exactly the situation we've got. And if you look at the rate of unemployment amongst black men who also have a supposed child support liability, none of which, by the way, has been tested in a court of law. They've just been assigned it bureaucratically, in effect. Then the unemployment rate is staggering. It's like well over 90%. So that hasn't worked. Now, the other side of it, has it made these men or the women and the men want to get together and get married and have the the stable family and that sort of thing. Well, that hasn't worked either, because the man has got, these men, most of these men are low wage guys, or again, intermittent employment anyway. And so the state, as soon as the guy, they get together and the guy's income's there, suddenly the state says, well, we're not going to give you benefits anymore to the woman. You're no longer entitled to government housing or free medical care or any of those sorts of things. So all those benefits disappear. So if the guy is an intermittent low wage guy with no skills or education or anything, then the government is a much more reliable supplier of money and benefits than the guy is. So the woman said, well, why would I want to get with a guy? I mean, sure, I want guys to come over and fuck me and all this thing, but I don't want these guys to move in, because then I lose all these benefits. Whereas if I have another child, I get even more benefits. So and so on it goes. So the cycle that they've encouraged from a number of the woman has no incentive to have a relationship with a man unless he's a higher income guy, which hardly any, very few of these guys are. The guy has no incentive to work because he's been saddled with a child support debt that he may not even owe the woman, because remember, the burden of proof she has to meet is like the lowest of the lowest low bar of evidence, and whereas the burden of proof he has to meet is the highest of the high bars. So once she fingers him as the guy, then that's it. He's the guy, and he has that liability. The state governments have vested interest in chasing after these men, because even if they don't collect any money, they get an allowance from the government, federal government, hands them cash and go, well, we tried hard to find him, or we tried hard to make him pay, or something. So then the federal government gives them money for really trampling on this black man's rights. So the whole thing is a fucking disaster from beginning to end. And again, all the measures that were made, possibly in good faith, I don't know, maybe in good faith in the late 50s and early 1960s to make black men responsible. And the assumption of what the problem was deeply flawed. It never was the problem. So they're getting, brutally going after, trampling across their legal rights in an attempt to believe, well, this is the problem, we just do this, everything's fixed, when that never was the problem, nor was it ever going to fix anything. So that to me was obvious even back in the time. So I don't know how they even arrived at this view, but nonetheless they did. Again, heavily overrepresented with Jewish lesbians in all the policy making and discussions back in the day. And it was sort of in a crude way got caught up in some of the earlier civil rights talk. But anyway, it solved nothing. It made everything worse. And again, it has this thing where, and we all need to be aware of this, whenever there's this we've got this huge social problem, and it's misogyny, it's racism, it's rape, it's this, it's that, it's irresponsible men procreating but not taking their responsibility, all these sort of things. And the solution is to take away the legal rights of various sections of the population. Stop. That is never the fucking answer. And why anyone thinks it ever could be or should be or might be is quite beyond me. You've been a Tacitus today, you're a Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.